Okay, so here we go again. This time it's for real. We are here in Madrid in Ecosistema Urbano's office. This is the second session, the second open lecture of the network design process that Ecosistema has started in Hamar to design the square of Stortorget. That, as you might know, Stortorget is a huge, it's a very big square in Hamar, which is city in Norway, and we have engaged into a very thorough and complex process of participation, both with residents, with authorities, with different groups in the city, but also with people around the world. And this is part of that. We have a series of open workshops, 3. And this is called Public Space and People. This is our second session, every Wednesday in October from 6 to 7, and every Tuesday from 6 to 7 we have the working session with people that have been registered. And this is a general open session that is going to be today about the different uses of public space. It's something we have discussed already somehow, but I would like to go a bit deeper into it. The blog of this workshop is really hot these last days, especially with this topic of uses of public space, but also with different aspects of participation and on the how participation can affect or enhance the use of public space. So this is going to be a bit what we're talking today, what we're going to talk about. I really encourage you to participate, to say things through the chat, which I have Francesca with me. So I'm going to be very, very aware of what's going on. And that's Francesca's hand, as a matter of fact. I have a very simple presentation. I have to apologize because my skills are not so sophisticated as those of an architect, because I cannot run any design program, and I just PowerPoint a little bit. But the functions. Let's go first to the functions and the uses and incentives of public space. That's what we're going to see today. Okay, so okay, so can I put just the whole. Okay, so today we want to talk about the different functions of public space. I want to give the impression that, to transmit the impression that public space is a complex space. It's a place in which there's a big complexity in terms of people doing different things, people operating in different layers. So the notion of layers of a public space, I think, is very useful to think about, both when we want to design it, when we want to prepare a new public space, or to renew or to redesign or revitalize an old public space, but also when we're trying to understand what's going on, when we try to study, we want to make the research on the public space, or yes, a diagnosis on potential, let's say, conflicts that might happen in public space. So I think this is very important to think in public space in terms of layers of different things going on in a multi-dimensional fashion. Okay, so what are the functions, the main functions of public space? We're going to go through them. Some of them have been already mentioned yesterday or in the blogs, but I want to put them all together because each of these bullet points really have a lot of different aspects that I want to go through and to look at with examples because it is something that certainly is going to be very important when we want to think in Hamar or in any other public space when we want to work on a public space. So first of all, we have a public space which has a function of work. Obviously, there are a lot of different people, different professions, different groups that operate in a public space. And I want to stress this idea of formal and informal. When we talk about formal work, of course, we're talking about people having business in a public space or surroundings, offices, but also and especially shops, bars, restaurants, all these kind of services which are close to the public space, which have a strong direct relation with public space, and operate in a very close relation with public space and with the people that, of course, are using public space in different ways. So this is important. This is the formal function of it. The informal dimension of work in a public space is is multiple too. It might range from people just gathering different objects for recycling or for selling them afterwards, like cans or paper, stuff like that. It might range from vendors selling stuff in an informal way. I don't want to go into the details of where it's legal or illegal, but let's say it's informal. So guys selling anything from DVDs, fake DVDs, to maybe beers, fresh beers, as it happens in a lot of cities in Spain, in which in each city different ethnic groups. In Spain, in Madrid is people from Bangladesh or India. In Barcelona, for instance, are Chinese people. They would sell you a can of fresh beer in a lot of squares or streets, especially squares in the very city center. So that's an example of informal activity. And that informal activity, in the case of a lot of squares in Madrid or Barcelona, and of course in other cities too, it gathers activity, it gathers action, it attracts action, because you know that you can find when the bars are crowded or the bars are about to close, you can find fresh beer somewhere, and people go there and hang out around those places because there's a supply of beer, which is certainly an informal job, an informal business. Okay. Also, some informal aspects of work in public space, and I have to say that work and business is quite related. But when we talk about work, we're talking about the people. We're talking about the workers' activity, the workers' position in the public space, how work, both formal and informal, occupy public space. Another informal activity in public spaces, which is much, I would say, controversial, would be drug dealing, which is an informal business, it's an informal activity. It is illegal, certainly, in some, well, depends on the country, but most places it's illegal. Prostitution, which in this case some places is illegal, some places is not illegal. It's also a very controversial work activity, informal. In some places is formal, but it's something which certainly defines the ethos of a given public space, the use of it, the perceptions, the symbolism, the identity of public space around that activity. Okay, so we have looked at work as a function of public space and have put some examples of formal and informal activity. Another interesting aspect of public space is just its function as a way, as a place to go through, to pass through. The other day, Agatha was in her blog was highlighting the dimensions of flaneur or passerby. Flaneur, I guess, motivated by the mythical situationist concept, in which, as you know, these urban drifts were just taking the protagonists from place to place in a lot of public spaces. Also, the Dada movement started with this idea some decades before the situationists, about the idea of just passing through, of being a flaneur, a drifter, and just discovered and perform just by being in a place. Of course, passing through nowadays hasn't got this strictly, or I would say almost none, of these romantic perceptions or notions, but rather passing through means that you choose to go through a specific public space because it's pleasant, because it's a shortcut, because it's efficient for your errands, for your way doing different things, on your way to work or to home, but essentially because you like it. Often when we go to our place, even sometimes if we go by car, but generally, and I encourage every one of you of using your legs to move around, both in bike or by walk. But generally, when you go in one of these means of transportation, legs, bike, sometimes even motorbike, you choose different ways. You have different alternatives to go from your, let's say, work to your home. Your usual trips, your daily trips. You generally have 2 or 3 options, which give you different feelings, different sensations when you use them. Sometimes you're fed up of using the usual one. It's like, well, I'm going to use this other one because I think it's much more convenient. Or today, I just feel like filling, the trees that I can see in that alternative way. So passing through, it's very important, because if we design a decent, nice, attractive, homey public space, we would have people going through because they just like to, and because they have to go somewhere and they use this square to go through. Probably in summer or spring they would go literally through the middle of it. Probably in winter or fall they would go by the sides of it, seeking the protection of the psychological protection of the buildings and of the cafes around it. So passing through is quite important. I go back to Agata's mention of passerby and flaneur, because she was addressing different ways of using the space, which I think were related to this notion of going. There were people that go to the public space, people that would go to the public space just for leisure, others that have to go for work or for an errand or some sort of thing to do there, and also those that would just pop around, so to speak, or which would be the flaneurs or passers-by. So people that would just drift around the square. That, I think, the 3 uses are something that have to be thought about when we design the square, and probably the quality of the square is going to be more measurable if we manage that this third way of using this square, which is just going there because we like it, turns the most important one. Okay, so this is a bit passing through. The third use, it's of course meeting. We use public spaces to meet. We use public spaces as a reference point. When we don't know the surroundings, we just say, okay, let's meet in that particular place because we all know. So public spaces, or some parts of public spaces, when I use as meeting points, are used also as common references, as common referentials of the urban space. In a lot of cases, people would gather around in a certain place of a square, and there would be a particular spot where to meet in a particular place. In London, in Piccadilly, people would meet in the middle, in the island of Piccadilly, because it's a place where it's very visual and everybody would go there, and it is full of meaning and symbolism. For Londoners, that's a place where you meet people and you will meet friends. Barcelona, some points in the Ramblas are also very important to meet at, or just the metro exit. In Madrid, there are a number of them. One of them is Café Comercial, which is it's an old cafe, and people would meet outside that cafe. Okay, so meeting points meeting is a function of public space, which is not only just functional, but it's one of the main incentives or main fittings of identity towards a public space. And you know, when you meet someone, or you used to meet people in a given place, in a given public space, that public space, that square, that street, those gardens, that park starts turning into a place, because it gathers meanings through social practice, through the initiation of an interaction that would be the outcome of that meeting. Okay, so it is a quite, I think, a very sensitive function for public space, and I certainly would encourage you, or if you're thinking in doing different interventions around Hamar, that you maybe should think of developing a meeting place in Hamar. So far, the meeting place in Hamar, which I understand in winter it has some logics. It's one of these non-places, one of these international, global non-places. And guess what it's not a Starbucks, but it's a McDonald's. So people meet in the McDonald's because it's a very, very known, close reference, and everybody is able to identify colors, logo, and to some extent the smell of the McDonald's. And you just go there to meet other people. So it might be a good idea as an exercise to provide Hamar Square, Stortorget, with a strong element for identity, a nice meeting point, which shouldn't have to be very, very obvious, but probably very attractive for people, and sheltering but visible, accessible, attractive, identifiable, etc. Okay, so meeting is a function of public space. The next function would be living.
A lot of comments. I don't know if you want to comment.
Yeah, let me go just a minute to the. Let me go back to the chat. I'm sorry. Let me just have a very quick look in a second or two, and then we might have a look. Okay, Agata is sharing. Agata and Alejandra, thank you very much. Is sharing these websites about walking, and walking as a way of transportation, as an alternative way of transportation, and definitely sustainable. Thank you, because this is something that I need. I think it is a very interesting element. Alejandra from Mexico through Berlin is providing us with another very interesting website. She has been working in that too, as far as I know, and I think it's quite an interesting element. Think that a lot of the people living, using Hamar and the square and the business areas are people coming from different places, so probably they would use the car. People use the car a lot in Scandinavia because for different reasons, sprawl, distances, weather conditions, etc. But also they're very environmentally conscious. So both in Hamar and any place in the world, it's always very, very healthy, interesting, environmentally friendly, sustainable. You name it. A lot of adjectives, positive adjectives too. Take in account walking as a key or protagonist in our moving mobility schedule, in our personal mobility schedule. It is an option, and sometimes it's a bit tiring, but you get used to it and you love it. It's the same as going by bike. something else around. Okay, Milosevic, it's mentioning something about technology. He says, if one can see and absorb the social life of public spaces, it can help to re-establish a sense of connection between individuals in small but important ways. The isolation of technology brings the biggest problem. And Alejandra mentions in a very clever way, but in technology it also helps to organize groups of social activities. Yeah, Milosevic, this is a very key issue we were mentioning yesterday, and it's coming, and there's a lot of in geography, in sociology, in urban sociology, it's becoming a very, very hot issue, which is basically the relation between the virtual city and the real city. Most people, most theorists in the early 90s, including Castells, Manuel Castells, the Spanish sociology at Berkeley, who start theorizing about the informational society, were in those days were talking about the gap in terms of accessibility to new technologies, and it also were talking about flows of information and a clear differentiation between virtual and real cities, and virtual and real society, virtual and real interactions. But more and more, and of course after the huge events of this year, this spring or winter, in different countries, in Tunisia, in Egypt, in Spain, in Libya to some extent, Syria to some extent too, we are and of course tons of them more to come, that's for sure, hopefully including China. We see that the new technologies, the social networks are being key to turn back public spaces or just urban open spaces, which have even lost, in a lot of cases, had even lost their condition of public spaces, but they were just urban open spaces, have been turned into places. What I lived this year in Madrid, in Puerta del Sol, was the epitomization of all these, placification of a square in a very intense and direct and in solid and emotional way. Okay, so I think we still have to think about very much the tension between virtuality and reality in the micro level. Not only with the big events in all these cities I mentioned or countries, but also we are living an era of cities like Madrid. We are living an era of new micro activism, new urban activists operating at a micro level in the neighborhood, not even in the district, but in the neighborhood, in a specific group of streets, in a specific square in which people gather, maybe to have a breakfast together, call by Twitter, and you have 80 people having a breakfast every 3 weeks and generating a network, or you have people demonstrating or deactivating an eviction process against the family, or just gathering around cultural activity in an appropriated empty plot in the middle of the city. So there is a lot of new things going on, and in those things which are micro, are community level, and are quite intense and relevant for the participants, new technologies are key. Okay, this is something we were talking about with Susana, our Spanish participant, and she wants to do something in terms of virtual real, digital real communication. She's very worried about something that worries me a lot, which is the digital gap, especially for certain social groups. We think about the aged people, about people with less access. In Norway, immigrants would be into these kind of less accessible or less integrated people in terms of digital access, both with aged people. And she was suggesting some very interesting ways of giving access to these people and putting information at the reach of these groups. She would probably talk about this next week. So we are very excited about that. Okay, let's go to another of our points, which would be living in the public space. Of course, in the case of Hamar, living is not very possible around the whole year, but living is an activity that takes place in a number of public spaces in a number of cities. Homeless people that have, sometimes even they have a shelter or even a house, a home, but they just have their public space, the streets, square, a park. They have it as a home, because there's where they spend most time of the day, where they do their activities, which might be generally informal activities, economic activities, or pendling, or just staying there and meeting other friends, sometimes consuming substances, etc. So living has become a very interesting aspect of public spaces. I certainly don't know what's the situation for Hamar. I don't think there might be a lot of homeless people living or potentially living in that square, because I don't think there are a lot of homeless people in Norway. I know they are, but the more people that have generally problems with alcohol or drugs, and they have a broad network of social assistance. But in other places, in other countries, people live in public spaces because they're more visible, they're more safe for them. They have resources of different kinds. They find food, they might find some economic activity, gathering things, pendling, selling, buying, a number of things. There are resources. There's food available in restaurants and bars, and there's a lot of also of social resources, social services, charities that would give, food or clothes or shelter, and a lot of them are in the city centers because they're very old. So that's why in some public spaces in some cities, living is an important function, to the dismay of the local authorities and business actors, stakeholders, because they might think that your business might be hindered, the image of the business might be hindered by that people living there, and of course by the public authority, because they associate these groups with marginality. They give a bad image for the city. Sometimes they're associated with criminal activities, like robbing or drug consumption, fights, conflicts, etc. So most of the cases they just move to different places where they are not seen if they are settling in a very, very visible place. But I have to say that sometimes there is a kind of symbiotic relation between business and homeless people living in a given square, which is that if you have people living in front of your shop front in the night, probably that shop won't be assaulted or robbed or something, because there's people there, the witnesses, there are people around, and it would be more intimidating for any robber or thief to perpetrate some action in a place which there is people. This is certainly the case for Plaza Mayor in Madrid, with the owners or very old centenary shops. If you've been in Madrid, you've probably been there. Have a deal. They have negotiated with the homeless people that use those places to live. Okay, you can stay here. This kind of coordination, and there's some sort of support, mutual support. They know when they have to go, at what time. They leave everything very clean. They have to not disturb the residents, but they have a place to stay, and they also benefit sometimes from the shop and from the business. Another interesting function. Well, business, but I mentioned it already to some extent. I will go very, very quickly. Business, I mentioned work, informal and formal. I mentioned also activities by people that live there, generally informal. But I also want to mention the importance of having a business, open business towards the public space. And of course we go back to the classic, to Jane Jacobs, where she states how downtowns in the US in the 60s and 70s were basically dying because there was less and less activity in the streets. People have moved out to suburbs, to suburbia, in this kind of explosion of or kind of apotheosis of the middle class, of the American dream. Offices and business would be staying in downtown, and in the middle there would be a fringe of less and less buoyant neighborhoods, which would be falling into pieces, in which generally minorities or low-income white classes would be striving to survive. And one of the things she says is that it is absolutely important, it's absolutely essential for a city, for an urban space to be used, to be populated, to have life. So open shops, groceries, terraces, all sort of businesses not only provide security, but they provide life. They provide incentives to live in a given neighborhood. They provide incentives to use a street, and if it's pedestrian, of course, much better, to use a street as a place for neighbors to play, kids playing, people meeting, people passing through because it's very attractive, people enjoying working in that place, etc., etc. So I think one of the key elements, not only for public spaces, for understanding public spaces and improving public spaces in the city center, but also for the city center as a whole, is this idea that you should look for a place to work which is very close to the place you live. So you work where you live. You don't live where you work. A lot of people have to commute and spend more time commuting and working than they are able to spend in their own homes. So I think it's important to highlight these dimensions of business/economic activity, not only in terms of providing life to the public space, but also improving or rethinking issues like quality of life, like models of urban life, so on and so forth. Okay, another issue, of course, is rest and leisure as a very, very important fundamental function of the public space. Probably this is the one we are more acquainted with. To some extent, leisure is also leisure is a very, what would be the word in English? But it would be a very controverted topic, because sometimes leisure, or sometimes no, more and more in Western cities, leisure tends to be privatized. So what used to be a public space in which people meet, gather, just encounter themselves, interact, eventually do business, exchange in different ways, it has become, as I was saying before, very important. It would have a very important business dimension. So those idealized images of Jane Jacobs are good money, and it's not only good money for the business itself, but it's good money for the public administration, for the local administration, which is charging businesses to allow them to operate in public spaces. We're now not talking about the grocer or even the small terrace. Sometimes terraces grow too big and invade public spaces, but we're also talking about how public spaces in a lot of cities, my city among them, Madrid, are literally privatized on a temporal basis and used as places for promotion of private companies, private firms. They just would set a big place that you often cannot have access to, because it's only with an invitation for presentation of a Nokia or whatever cell phone or company or car model or something would like to be presented there. So we have this idea that leisure, which is a natural, completely obvious function of a public space, a lot of times and more is hindered by private activity, by business. So the more and more leisure is associated with consumption, and this is something we really have to break with. And I think in Scandinavia, this is still a way of thinking. Leisure is something free, is something personal, individual, is something part of your free non-working time, your free non-consumption time. And it is about this. It's about understanding that our free time, our time to rest, our time to enjoy is not necessarily, in fact, it should be a way of consumption. It should be a way of patterns and consumption. We are more and more given the message, a constant message that we have to consume to enjoy. And this is far from reality. Consumption is not only hindering your domestic economy, but also provides a lot of stress for consumers, because you have to choose among a huge range of different products, objects, necessities, needs, and limitations. So let's go back and think in a public space as a purely rest, leisure, individual, private space. Okay. Let me now check. Yeah, that's a very good point. Jabib and students from Egypt. From where? No.
Javier.
Oh, Javier. Sorry. Oh, sorry. No. Javier from Limerick. Javier Buron and his students. He was mentioning that Jane Jacobs never sorted out the issue of gentrification. Of course, it has Jane Jacobs. A lot of the writings of Jane Jacobs have this kind of middle class, urban middle class, progressive middle class flavor. But still, she was addressing a lot of situations in which what are called ghettos, or what would be the working class neighborhoods in the city, in the downtowns of the states, were full of that life. Despite he couldn't thought about options about gentrification, which is something I have to look at, because I'm not sure I fully agree with that. But mentioning in the 60s a lot of working class or ethnic clusters, even some of those so-called ghettos, which is a quite controversial concept. It would be that kind of life what she's addressing. This kind of being everyone in the street, using the street as a extension of your domestic space, because often it was very, very small. It was crowded with people, etc. So this kind of appropriation, of collective appropriation, not community but collective appropriation of public space, is what we were addressing before. And part of that appropriation of public space go through business, go through activities of interaction, even of leisure, kids playing, and of course of work too. So it sort of gathers together all these ideas. Let's go now to the new. I also included this point of resources, but I think we have already mentioned that. With our resources, we talk about people finding jobs, finding business activities, all sorts of things, or just enjoying together. What would be the incentives for the use of public space? Well, some of them we've seen it, but I wanted to. This is more or less the same, but from a different point of view. It's not just the use of it, but why do you want to use it? Remember that we were talking both Agatha and and some other authors, urban planners, have been talking about the different ways of using and different ways of using the public space, and behind that there's the motivation. So you use public spaces, as I was saying before, because you feel safe, you feel protected, you don't feel threatened. You don't go into Central Park at 3 o'clock in winter because you don't feel secure and protected, but you might go into a nice pedestrian street in in downtown, in the village in New York City, because you feel protected and you feel safe. You use public spaces because there's a likelihood of social interaction, because you're going to meet people, because that you have appointed with, because you're going to just meet random people around, you're going to see people, you might engage into a conversation, into a small business, into an exchange, etc. And that's very attractive. And again, this idea of social interaction as an incentive links with the idea of the abandonment of public spaces as places of social interaction, because now we have other means of social interaction, namely communication technologies, but also, as we were mentioning before, about Susanna's idea and Nashevik ideas, which was, okay, let's give the public space again the protagonism of a place to meet, of an agora, of a place where you can exchange, you can learn, you can go and feel and find the unexpected. We live in a time of increasing uncertainty, but we need more and more and more certainty. So that's bad news for us. We need to know more and more what is going to happen, and as it's being shown, we know less and less what is going to happen. Maybe 10 years ago, no, but now, today, anything can happen in terms of world politics, world economy, catastrophes, etc. So we really need, and we seek certainty, which is a bit absurd. And that kind of certainty was covered decades ago in traditional societies in Mediterranean countries, not so long ago, by public spaces. People would go to a place and meet and find information and see who is who, find a boyfriend or a girlfriend, someone to marry with, someone to marry your daughter with, someone to make a business with. There was a specialization of these different interactions in terms of markets, or Sunday afternoons after church. You would go and there and try to flirt, to show off, to show up, etc. This is sort of lost, because now people do that by through Facebook or in other places, in other public, private places like bars or stadiums or whatever. But I think it's a very important idea to recover the incentive of the use of public spaces in terms of social interaction, of this kind of pure interaction in which you are going to meet someone, you're going to find someone, you're going to see something that you not expect to, you're going to learn something, and you're going to go out of that experience in the public space with something new, with something you didn't expect it, or something you wanted to have, information, something like that. Okay, so I think this is interesting to think about when we think about our projects in Store to Get. I never would learn this long and beautiful name, Store to Get Square. Incentives to the use of public spaces, well, profits associated with some of these things I was mentioning about social interaction. You take something with you. If you make a business and if you flirt with a nice guy or a nice girl, you're having a profit. If you learn something, you have some news about something. Those were the incentives that public spaces used to have. I'm really calling, making a call to try to think about that and to recall them, to recuperate them. I think it would be very, very good for all of us to talk with our elder people and ask them for the experiences in their public places. What do you mean?
A lot of comments.
Okay, a lot of comments here. Okay, so a lot of these were profits. Other incentives: survival, shelter, food. So it's not just a news, but you go and you look for that there. Of course, symbolic and material consumption. When you are in Piccadilly, when you are in Place Pigalle, you're consuming history, you're consuming location, you're consuming place. But of course, you also find a Zara or find an H&M or find Starbucks when you link that symbolic consumption to that material consumption. Leisure, of course, we mentioned it before, and we're going to go back to the blog, to the chat, where there's a lot of action going on. Okay, so Alejandra says, Mexico City, there are reports of reduction of criminality due to an efficient provision of public lighting. Something really basic can make a change. This is very interesting because I agree with that. In most Central and Northern European cities, there is a converse trend, which is to reduce illumination. So if you go to Vienna or you go to Berlin, you will see that the illumination is very, very, I wouldn't say dark, but very low. More sustainable, less light contamination, but also enough to hold minimum standards of security in most neighborhoods. So this is quite interesting. In some cases you want to do something to change, which is add more light, add more visibility to what's going on in public space. In other places you just don't need that, and you want to give back public space in the night a different sort of protagonism, which is just as a place to go through, especially streets, maybe not so much squares. Javi, great point, Andres. Should public spaces just resign and delegate these roles to these new and more effective, sophisticated forms of social interaction? Talking about online social networks? No, I don't think so. I don't know if you understand that from my words. I think it is a great moment to articulate through the new technologies, to articulate both new uses, new sensibilities about public spaces, but also to recuperate and to look back to what public spaces meant to only 1 or 2 generations ago. A lot of these things have been lost because we have in 15-20 years we have an amazing increase in stimuli for leisure, for information, for interaction, and of course public spaces have lost in this trade. So I think it's a good moment to try to articulate both things. Going back to what I was saying before, these notions of virtual and real do really have sense together. And there's also, there are already lots of applications of smartphones that would just grant you interaction in public spaces, instant interaction in public spaces. Maybe we don't need so much instant interactive. We don't need just to play the role of a very instant demanding. Sorry, I looked to the chat and I just couldn't concentrate. I was saying that we have to get rid of this idea of, we cannot get rid of it. We just have to palliate, or have to, to be aware of this obsession with the need of certainty, the need of immediate satisfaction, and we need to rely more in some aspects of life, of real life, which implies waiting, which implies surprising oneself, and I think a lot of these can happen in public spaces through social interactions, but also with the help of the new technologies. Agatha says that there's 2 situations where you use the public space. Sometimes we want to use the public space, but sometimes you have to be there, like you just have it on your way. Yeah? Agatha, for children also the public spaces are sometimes uncomfortable, just too risen. I don't know what you mean by risen. If you can explain that, I would appreciate. Yeah, I was saying that sometimes you have to work, you have to maybe not just work in a shop, but you have to work cleaning a public space, or you have to work assisting homeless people in a public space, or you have to work as a police, watching and surveilling a public space. So certainly you have to work there, and those are probably some of the most critical professionals they're critical with this idea of public spaces, like somewhere like everything can happen. As we would see later, if we have time, most of the squares that are being designed in a lot of cities in Madrid in the world, and especially in Madrid, are hard, flat surfaces which are very easy to clean and very easy to watch, and that's the key thing, because interaction, a lot of things going on in public space, they might bring sometimes some security, some protection, but it also might bring complication, because we're talking about complexity, we're talking about different layers of things going on with different actors at different times of the day. So in some cases the planners tend to simplify dramatically the uses of public space, and they just place a hard flagstone on top of it, and that's it, and then you can just water it and just clean it and put a couple of police cars, so nothing happens, and that grants you security, and but also grants you the function of the public space and the gradual decay of it. Okay, in our last slide, I just put together some ideas we were talking about yesterday, which was the uses of public space, and I made this kind of, it's not a grid, because this is not a grid. It would like to be more, it has a vocation more of a spider net or something. So it's the when, who, and how do users, people, residents, people in general use public spaces. The how, well, we mentioned it, workers, people working there in different scales, different degrees of action of interaction with public space, but people working in the public space, passers-by, those who choose to pass by, those who have to pass by, as Agatha was saying, because the public space is there, but if you don't like it, you avoid it. Sometimes if you have to avoid public space because you find it's not attractive, it's dangerous, or you don't feel safe, you have to give a big turn, but people do it because public spaces might be very attractive, but might be also very unattractive and very scary. Okay, so passers-by, both compulsory passers-by, flaneurs, or just people that just drift there. And then finally, users of public space, people that go there for something, that go there for an errand in a public administration, to go to library, like in the store to get, go to meet someone in a terrace, go to play, go to see what's going on, etc. So this would be the how people use public space in a very synthetic way. Of course, there are other ways of typologies of these potential uses. So the who, yesterday also we were talking about different aspects of how who would use, how to classify the character, the social character, the social characteristics of users of public space. So one important thing is social class. Social class has been a critical element to determining who is a user of public space and who can use it and who cannot use it. We're talking about appropriation, we're talking about social control, we're talking about a lot of things. There are lots of examples about these, and probably one of the most exciting things I've read recently was something by Baudelaire, quoted by David Harvey, around the transformation of the center of Paris, the Haussmann-Paris, the Haussmannization of Paris. This is the bourgeoisization of Paris. And he was describing his feelings when he saw this terrace in a cafe with all these wonderfully dressed middle upper classes enjoying their coffee, and seeing a father with his son, dressed in a very poor condition, obviously hungry, and completely stunned, looking at those cafes and those pastry and things. And therefore, certainly the reading that Baudelaire and David Harvey makes about this scene, which is very dramatic, despite it's not violent, but it's very dramatic, is, okay, these new Paris, these new public spaces, which often are privatized, are completely closed and banned for the working class, which is the majority of the city. So with this example, I want to show you how social class have been always critical element to understand and interpret public spaces. Often when a group of kids, or to put an example, a group of kids of an ethnic minority, of immigrants, so to speak, start using a park or a square or a public place, a playground, a lot of middle-class moms in a hypothetical gentrified or process of gentrified neighborhood, we just stop going there because they would feel threatened. They would don't know exactly what is going on. They would distrust these guys because they are different, because they are of another social class, etc., etc. So social class is quite important. And in terms of immigration, social class has redefined the ethnic origin of people, has redefined in terms of ethnic origin / immigration, social class has been redefined in a lot of countries, especially in the countries of the south of Europe, in which the appearance of new ethnic communities is fairly recent. This happened too in the 70s and 80s in countries like Great Britain or France, or even a bit earlier, which the competition for public space was often based on the different groups of immigrants, locals, etc. So very important about the feelings. First, the access. In the case of Norway, of Hamar, very few immigrants are seen in the center, so we have an issue to have a look to there. They don't speak the language often. They're not, apparently, this is what I know, I'm not certain about that, but we have this feeling they don't feel invited to participate in the city center life. But this is just an hypothesis, no, it's not certain. But in a lot of cases, ethnic origin is going to be, as I was saying, a very important element to distinguish between a good, acceptable public space and a public space which has a feeling of, I would say, a feeling of insecurity. Another important issue: gender. Public spaces are not the same for women as for men. The use of public spaces is not the same. Sometimes in some uses it is the same, definitely, but public spaces are regarded different by men and by women. A woman generally has much more elements of distrust towards the public space in terms of the time of the day, of the light it has, of the people hanging around, of the activities, a lot of things to feel threatened in her security, in her personal security. So I, again, as we were saying yesterday, I encourage you to think in terms of gender, in terms of public spaces, to test public spaces in terms gender-wise. If women or any group feel comfortable, if there are some black points in which they're not friendly, or they're scary, or they're not functional for a gender approach to the design of public space and the evaluation of public space. And remember, and this goes kind of a general approach to everything, that when we talk about public space, we're talking about, when we talk about Hamar, we have to think about something which is going on now, something that we're going to design and build in a near future, but also we have to think in a space which is going to evolve, which is going to go through different dynamics along the years. And so our approach to it now has to be really broad and wide in terms of what might happen next, not just what is going to happen now. Finally, another interesting element to think about who uses public spaces is age. Of course, old people, young people, kids, mother of kids, young people doing lots of different things, from skating to singing, performing, hanging out, etc. Some of these age groups are feeling compatible with others. Age people would distrust guys in skateboards because they're dangerous, because if they just touch you, they can break your waist. They would distrust people drinking, or people doing other things, or people making noise or something. So age is something very important, and together with this idea of age, accessibility for different groups and different conditions of users, handicapped people especially, it's very important. But age is a critical matter to think and understand a public space, and definitely aged people have to participate and have to be engaged into participation when we design store to get. Okay, the database security. Let's go very few. We have very short time left. Let me finish this, and then we go to the post to the chat. Okay, when again, night and day, different uses, different sensations, different feelings, different uses and users, of course, and this links a bit with the gender issue I was mentioning before. Night and day, and in the case of store to get, of course, the seasonal dimension is key. We have to think that most of winter it's night, there's very little light. In spring and summer things change. In fall it's even darker because there's not so much snow. But still, the seasonal uses are very important. And we have to think that the public space is always a public space, and it has to be open to any use, or to encourage and enhance as much use as possible, even in those periods of the year in which weather is more unfriendly. But Norwegians are very, very keen on winter too, and they're very outdoor people. And I think the possibilities of articulating proposals for the winter in Stortorget is going to be terrific. Yesterday, one of the students of Javier Buron in Limerick was suggesting to do urban furniture, street furniture with snow and ice, and I thought that was a terrific idea, and I'm sure that's going to be very, very well received in Hamar. Okay, let me go just a minute to the post. There has been a debate on security, which is much associated with the uses of public space. Christian Helle mentions that I read a report that document enough streetlight to see the eyes of the strangers on the street led to a decrease in assaults and robbery. Well, one thing is to see the eyes, which I agree with that. Another thing is to see what's going on if something is being attacked or mugged or something. Rosanna, street lighting brings more security, but it's not enough, definitely. It's very important policing and surveillance of the same people. I have to say that one of the things that comes out in every single research about public spaces, about neighborhoods, and I would say in most of the research I've done of city centers, of touristic areas, of suburbs, it's the notion of perceived insecurity. So a lot of times, of course, some areas are insecure and dangerous, but most of the times we confront security in terms of a perceived insecurity. We think a given area is going to be less secure or less safe than it initially is. What gives us the impression or the certainty of security? Lightning, people in the streets, activity, feeling that if something happens, someone is going to pass by and is going to give a call to the police or an ambulance or whatever, or just help you. The idea of feeling not alone in the street, but that if something happens, you can give a call and someone would show up in a window, if there's a windows around, of course. So very important, this notion of perceived and real security or insecurity, and think about that in terms of designing public space in Hamar. Agata, the main pedestrian street in Dams has a bigger quantity of surveillance cameras, but what is funny about it is that it's the only one place where you can drink beer in open air and police doesn't come to give you a mandate. It's illegal drinking. Of course, it's difference between causes, relating causes of mitigation measures. That's very right. I mean, the camera thing is a huge debate, and it has been expanding very intensely in city centers in Europe. But of course, its efficiency it's questioned, because you need a lot of people to survey and to process those images, and that's very, very expensive. So as far as I know, in many cities, in many situations, you have a lot of cameras, but you cannot, the police doesn't have the capacity to survey, to look at them together and stop petty crime going on in that particular moment. They might start a research on something and track illegal activity in the specific cases, but a lot of times it's just impossible to process hours and hours and hours of records. This probably is the case of London, where they're starting to face, or New York City is starting to face these issues, because the sheer amount of cameras is huge, humongous. And also it's in private hands, most of it. It's not just the police, but it's private civilians, which starts having some issues with individual liberties and things like that. Light pollution, yeah, that's something we might use. I'm not very and I'm not an expert in light pollution. I think I know I don't like it, and I know more or less what it is, but I don't know much more about the effects and stuff like that. But it's certainly important, and most of you are probably architects and engineers and know a lot about that, because it's a very technical dimension of public spaces. So this has been today's session, open session. I just go a bit through the. Is there something on more in the chat? Yes. I'm with Francesco here, supporting me with technically and spiritually. In this holiday in Spain, October 12th is our national day or something. We are having so it's a holiday, but we are here with all of you in this open session, which is as spiritual as not to respect any holidays. But well, of course, a pleasure. Next week we would go deep into participation in terms of concepts, elements of participation, different kinds of participation, so on and so forth. That would be for today. So thank you very much for joining. Thank you very much for the interaction. I'm going to give the voice to Francesco, which wants to give some advice.
Okay. Hi everybody. Yesterday I was encouraging online participants on the Hangout to interact between them and to mix ideas and connect different proposals you are working on. I think it's one of the key principles of network design, to interact and to remix idea. The best result would be that we have one proposal with different subject, but I mean we are it's quite free as a result. But I encourage you to go to the blog, to interact with other ideas, with other participants, and also I would like to invite you tomorrow to the session for the other online workshop, which is Tactical Urbanism at 5 o'clock through the Digital Lab, because I think also we should try to multiply connection between the two workshops and try to work together. So even if you are not registered for Tactical Urbanism, you can follow the session through the Digital Lab and interact via the chat. And for public space and people, we will meet on Tuesday at 6 p.m. As every week. So thank you very much, Alejandra. Thank you very much. Okay, thank you very much for staying with us. Javier, thank for your attention and for your student participation. Noah is also interacting from Hammer. Just now is the activity week in Hammer with an on-site workshop, and they are also debating and discussing about activities for public space. So we should try to also to connect what we are doing online with what they are doing on-site. Maybe it's one of the main objectives, and we are working on it. By the way, Noah will be probably with us the next week to interact with us on the.
Okay, terrific.
So we can have feedback from Hammers.
Say who is Noah?
Yes, Noah is actually with Belinda coordinating activities in Hammer for Ecosistema Urbano, and she will be back next week in Madrid. So I hope she will be able to join us for the next session on Google Hangouts. And so if you have a question, or if you want to know to have more detail about Hamar and people there, she will be able to answer. Okay, I think.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Bye bye.
And bye bye.